Pedro stood in the dock, the dimly lit courtroom, his hands shaking as he awaited the judge's ruling. 2 years ago, his life had been normal, full of hope and dreams, but everything had changed in an instant when he was accused of a crime he did not commit. He looked toward the gallery where Ada, his fiancée, sat with tears streaming down her eyes. She had been his trusted companion, the one person who had believed in him from the beginning. She had stood by his side, despite her own family's attempts to tear them apart. Her brother, James, had been the architect of his downfall and the reason Pedro had spent the last 2 years in prison. Pedro's mind wandered back to the beginning, when his love for Ada was young and life had seemed so simple. Pedro and Ada had met at the university. He was studying civil engineering, while she pursued a degree in law. From the moment they met, there was an undeniable connection between them. They laughed, shared stories, and dreamed of a future together. After graduation, they began to make plans for the life ahead. But there was one obstacle in their path: James, Ada's older brother. From the moment Pedro met him, James made it clear that he didn't approve of their relationship. He believed Pedro wasn't good enough for his sister and frequently accused him of being an opportunist who was only after Ada's family wealth. Pedro, who came from a middle-class background, never understood James's hostility. He had always treated Ada with respect and love. Yet, no matter how much he tried to win James over, the man remained cold and suspicious. James would make smear remarks and find every opportunity to belittle Pedro. At first, Pedro thought it was just overprotectiveness, but as time went on, James's hatred became clearer and dangerous. One fateful day, Pedro received an unexpected call from James asking to meet. Surprised but hopeful that James might have changed his mind, Pedro agreed. They linked up at Pedro's house, where James dropped his jacket to pick it up after their meeting at a nearby bar. James became unusually friendly and even offered him a drink. After a few drinks, James began to speak about a business deal and asked Pedro if he was interested in making some quick money from the deal. Pedro declined, sensing something wasn't right, but James insisted. James tried to convince him, but Pedro firmly refused, stating he had no interest in getting rich quickly. The next morning, everything unraveled. Pedro was awoken by a knock at his door. A team of policemen barged into his apartment and arrested him for drug trafficking. Pedro was shocked, trying to explain that he had no involvement in any such thing. But when the police searched his apartment, they found a brick of cocaine hidden in his wardrobe. James had asked to leave his jacket in the same wardrobe when they met last night. It was clear Pedro had been set up. Despite Pedro's protests of innocence, James testified against him in court, claiming that Pedro had been involved in criminal activities for some time. James's false testimony, combined with the planted drugs, was enough to convict Pedro. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Ada was devastated. Her family believed James and disowned her when she refused to leave Pedro or believe the allegation because she spends a lot of time with Pedro. She believed if there was anything of such, she would have known or noticed it. They accused her of being blinded by love and ignoring the truth about him. But Ada knew the man she loved could never have committed such a crime. She was determined to prove his innocence, even if it meant going against her family. For 2 years, Ada visited Pedro in prison on visit days. She hired lawyers, met with investigators, and tried to gather any evidence that could prove his innocence. Despite the growing pressure from her family to move on, Ada never wavered in her belief that Pedro was innocent. After 2 long years, a breakthrough came when an associate of James, who had been involved in other criminal activities with him, was arrested. During interrogation, the man revealed details about James's operations and confessed that James had framed Pedro to get rid of him. This revelation was enough to reopen Pedro's case. The new evidence, combined with the testimony of the associate, painted a clear picture of James's scheme. Pedro's innocence was proven, and he was released from prison. But it wasn't over yet. The court ruled that Pedro had been wrongfully convicted due to false evidence and malicious testimony. The government, in a gesture of accountability, awarded Pedro financial compensation for the 2 years he had unjustly spent in prison. James was arrested for perjury and drug-related crimes, his reputation and life in tatters. The day Pedro walked out of prison, Ada was there waiting for him, just as she had promised. She ran into his arms, tears streaming down from their eyes. "I knew you did not do it," she whispered, holding him tightly. Pedro was in tears, his heart full of gratitude and love. "I am proud of you," he said. In the months that followed, Pedro started rebuilding his life. With Ada by his side, he started a construction business that quickly gained recognition for its integrity and quality. Though they had been through hell, their love had only grown stronger. Ada's family, ashamed of their treatment of her and Pedro, sought for reconciliation. It wasn't easy, but over time, Ada and her family began to reconcile, though James's actions had left a permanent scar. A year after his release, Pedro and Ada finally had the wedding they had been dreaming of. It was a small, intimate ceremony, attended by close friends and family who had supported them through their ordeal. As Pedro watched Ada walk down the aisle in her white gown, his heart swelled with emotion. They had been through the darkest of times, but they had come out stronger together.